So we have the honor of having Noah Smith here. He is a computer scientist at the junction of natural language processing and machine learning and computational social science. His research spans problems in ML, general purpose ML, NLP, methods, methodology in NLP, and a wide range of applications. You can watch many videos on his talk, on various talks in his research group, on Noah's Ark and Allen NLP. He is an Amazon professor of machine learning in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering at Washington University, and also has adjunct positions in linguistics, statistics, social sciences, data science, amazing, and is a senior research manager also at Allen AI, and has lots of prior experience. He has his PhD from Johns Hopkins University and his computer science and linguistics undergraduate from University of Maryland. And with that, Noah, please.
Thank you, Joao. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, other Anna. Thank you for inviting me. I have to say this has been such a delightful few days, and today especially. It was really fun hearing from Bonnie and Zach and Rachel. I don't know if you are here, and the other presenters today. This is the first time I'm giving an in-person presentation in a long time, so bear with me. I'm a little nervous, a little scattered. I hope you can hear me out there in the metaverse. Is there a thumbs up? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So so here we go. This talk is called "What Makes a Result Negative," and you can relax. It's the end of the day. We've been here for 4 days. There are going to be no results, no positive results, no negative results, no neutral results, any kind of results. This is a talk that's intended for people who are researchers, who consider themselves researchers, particularly in NLP. Although I hope that it's helpful for other people. You know, some things transfer. I don't always know what's going to transfer, but I like to be clear about who I'm speaking to. And this is, I don't know if I would call it a position talk or a philosophy talk. That sounds pretentious. It's a very opinionated talk, and it's incredibly biased / informed by me. Basically, my main job is I mentor junior people. And I give advice on research. And I've worked with a lot of great people in all of my jobs over the years. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've been a researcher for 20 years. I think I'm still a researcher, although every day it feels like basically I'm just mentoring researchers. So there's a little bit of humility here, but I've also seen a lot of projects and a lot of people thinking about research and evolving, growing in the way they think about their research. So that's what I'm trying to bring to you in this talk. I'm also, the other thing I'll warn you is that I'm a really bad athlete. I'm not an athlete, and I've never been an athlete. And you'll see later why that's relevant to this talk. Okay. We have enough space here, I think. Yeah. Okay, so the first big point I want to make is I believe that our community, our fast growing community, is losing sight or losing an understanding of the distinction between research and practice. And this is something that's very clear in my head, because when I started in this field, there was very little practice. All right, NLP was not seen as offering anything of real value. Big companies, very few big companies were investing in it. And when they did, it was blue sky. It wasn't practical work that was building live systems. That has all changed, right? Lots of people believe, we can discuss whether they're right or wrong, that NLP has value. And so we see a lot of people doing practice, not just research. So let's talk about the difference between research and practice. Can you hear me in the back? Am I too loud in the metaverse? Awesome. Thank you. Ahmed, you're my hero. You're okay, good. Okay, so helpful distinction. NLP research. Primary motivation of a researcher, I believe, is usually intrinsic. Something gets you out of bed in the morning inside of you and makes you want to do research. You can argue with me later if you don't. The goal of research is to discover new knowledge. Often this takes the form of answering a question, but I want to be very broad in my definitions. So I think generally what we're aiming to do is understand something better, create new knowledge. That's usually what I tell my PhD students on their first day of their PhD. By the time you leave, we want you to create some new knowledge. And how do you know you're successful? Well, the knee-jerk answer to this is you're successful when you publish your work and people read it and cite it, right? That's not quite right. I actually don't think that's quite it. I don't think that's necessary or sufficient. I actually think a better way to think about it is that you are successful as a researcher when you changed people's minds, or you refined their thinking, or you improved the way they thought about the world. That's very hard to measure. Okay, lots of things in research are very hard to measure. It's hard to know. We can't see inside other people's heads very well. With apologies to the second keynote at the main conference, we're starting to get better, but we can't tell, we can't do a brain scan of you yet and tell whether this talk changed your mind. Okay, but I would put forward, this is the highest thing that researchers can aim to achieve. Let's contrast with practitioners. The primary motivation of most practice is some extrinsic demand. Or some extrinsic force. And usually the goal is to deliver some kind of real world outcome, or maybe a balance among several outcomes. I edited this slide after Rachel's talk. So, you want an accurate system, or a fair system, or a system that saves lives. I mean, how can you argue with that? Or that brings eyeballs to your employer's website, or creates clicks, or whatever. And the way you know that you were successful as a practitioner is you gain prestige and you make money. Okay, this is I'm being a little bit simplistic in drawing this distinction, but I think that you can find both of these in very clear forms in examples in the world today. And I really am not, I know I'm sure my tone changed because my position is as a researcher, and that's what I like to do. I'm not trying to say one is better or one is worse. Okay, what I'm trying to do is say that they're different. And they're both valuable in the world. They both can do great things for humans and increase the value of our lives, the quality of our lives, and they can each learn from the other. And I think both belong at conferences like this one, and both have a role to play in society, in the world. But I think it's important to keep them distinct. So let's talk a little bit about their commonalities and their differences. Okay. So one thing that you find, a bunch of things that you find are very valuable and important to both, and that may help you understand why I chose these words to refer to the distinction. First, I think, we talk about this a lot more in our research community now. As we've grown and become more visible, we talk about accountability, not just to the people who pay for our work. That's obvious, right? You don't want to get fired, but to the public. Right. And if you're a practitioner, maybe also we could include in that, especially users of your system. But there's this notion of accountability. And I think it goes, I'm going to dip slightly into the contrast. I think it goes a little farther for researchers. I think there's this additional element of accountability that we have in the research world to other researchers. And that comes in the form of recognizing the contributions that your work built on. Every time you're citing another paper in your paper, you are showing accountability to past work, right? And you're showing accountability to people who are learning from your paper by helping them understand how your work is contextualized. Okay, that's important. That's a little extra thing for researchers. You'll note that I use the word research and not science. Okay, I actually think science is a method. It's a set of methods. It's a way of drawing conclusions. It's a family of tools for drawing conclusions. And I believe scientific inference methods are and should be as widely used in practice as they are in research. Okay, we like to say, researchers style themselves as scientists, but anytime you're using scientific methods, you're doing science. And I think both researchers and practitioners need to know scientific methods. We've now, in my academic lifetime, seen the emergence of a whole field called data science, right? And it's often put to work in practice. So the tools of data science and other tools are needed in both worlds. You'll notice that I also didn't use the word engineering for practice. I think nowadays, good research requires significant engineering skill. Much of the time, not 100% of the time, but much of the time, in order to make big research advances, you need engineering skills. You need to be able to write good code that's reliable. You know what it does. You need to be able to build on code bases built by others. I have attempted to bring really strong research code developed by professional engineers into undergraduate courses with very mixed success, because undergraduates don't quite have the skills often to pick up really powerful engineering tools and use them effectively. Okay, an interesting observation. Maybe that will change soon. We also need valid measurements in both worlds. Measurement is very important to science. It's also very important to practice. We heard about this in Rachel's talk. And I think, this is something that I heard someone I admire a lot use this phrase, and it stuck in my head years ago, that you're not doing science if you haven't made yourself vulnerable to being proven wrong. And I'm not 100% sure I entirely agree with that. On a couple of fronts, but I think it is an important attitude to bring to both research and practice. You have to have a certain humility in both worlds, and ideally, I think really successful people in both tracks they have this trait. They're constantly. It's like a notion of being self-critical. I think it came up a little bit in Zach's talk as well. This idea, this sort of, I want clarity. I'm not necessarily, I might be wrong, right? I could always be wrong. And I want to constantly be questioning that. And I think that attitude is really helpful. So lots of things are really similar. And so we belong together at a conference. We belong together. We should be talking together. But we're different. And sorry, I'm losing my mouse. If I click, yeah. So I think, this is the kind of, I think the worldview of a practitioner can maybe be at a very high level. I say this with some risk that I'm getting it wrong. Ideally, what they want is they want the outcomes to get better over time, or as they put in more money, as they spend more time, as they hire more people, they want to have a bigger positive effect on the things they measure, the things that they care about. Maybe there's more than one. I'm probably oversimplifying here, but this is, I think, the mindset you're mostly in when you're doing practice, right? You want to, Rachel described herself as a practitioner. She wants to, I believe, to continue making a better experience for the people who use her system. That may be hard to measure, but she at least clearly can define what the outcome is, and she knows what direction she wants it to go. I think a better sort of metaphor for research is a map. Okay, there's this universe of things that we're trying to discover, we're trying to understand, and you'll notice on this map, which comes from a long time ago. Sorry, I don't know exactly when. It comes from a time when there's a big, up at the northwest corner of the map, you see a big underexplored territory. That's where I live now. And there wasn't much on the map because they hadn't plotted out all the rivers, and they didn't know who the people were who lived there. And so, I think a lot of the time we use this sort of spatial metaphor in research. We're looking for new questions. We're looking for unexplored territory. We want to go somewhere new. How does this research change my thinking? How does it change my mental representation of what is true? And then, just to sort of, illustrate the difference, I realized that map was a very colonial perspective. And so, when people arrived, when Western people arrived in the space I live in now, they discovered that there were people already there. And this is not a talk about that, but it's a useful kind of analogy. So you get there and you discover there's a culture here, there's people here, they're doing things. This happens in our work as well, right? You're working on a problem and then you find, oh no, there's this new archive paper from Google. Someone is already here. What do I do? And I think that the difference between the two cases helps illustrate my point that there's a difference. The researcher, after you catch your breath, go outside, get a little sunshine, calm down, recover your base pulse rate or whatever. You say, well, we can learn from this and let's see what they found out, see how it changes our perspective. We have to be accountable to them. We'll cite them. We'll build on we'll take what they did and keep going. And maybe we'll change paths a little bit because they've already answered some of the questions we were trying to answer. And you pick up the pieces and you move on. This has happened to people. Yeah. Raise your hand if this has happened to you. Good for you. You picked up the pieces, you moved on. It happens to all of us. I could tell a story about 2007 where there were 3 papers at EMNLP Connell that were all basically the same result. They all got published. We all laughed about it. We all cited each other. Everything was fine. It's lucky that it was all right the same moment. It's not always that easy, right? Okay. But this is the researcher has no other choice. You have to take it into account. You have to respect that they did the work and adapt, right? Practitioner. It doesn't matter, right? The question is, how does this affect my outcome? Is there information here I can use? If not, move on, keep going. It's not always the most important thing that you be the first to do the thing. The goal is often to do it better, right? And so it's actually not that important if you're building a practical system that your system isn't going to have a bibliography, right? So the reaction to this existing relevant work, someone has been here before. Now it might change your business model if you're at a company, right? There might be strategic business things, but from the perspective of the technical work, it's not such a worry. Okay, so everybody likes to talk about. I think we should just call it a verb, and I think we should always lowercase it. Okay, let's make it a verb. Let's just starting today, it's always a verb, and we lowercase it. I'm a native speaker, so I have a lot of opinions about this. So to soda or not to soda, this is the next piece. What makes a good question? Let's contrast these two points of view, research and practice, on what makes a good question. So this time let's start with the practitioner. A good question is usually a good question is one where, sorry, I'm messing up my notation. I knew I was going to make a mistake somewhere. A practitioner will say a question is a good question if we can know whether doing this thing or getting this measurement will lead to improved target outcomes on whatever it is we care about. Again, accuracy, fairness, engagement, eyeballs, clicks, whatever it is. So that's, you don't have a good question until you know that you can check that you can demonstrate that your target outcomes will go up. That's how you make your argument. A researcher, I would say, and this is, I imagine there are more things you could say. This isn't the only answer you could give, but this is kind of my answer to what makes it there. For every, put N researchers in a room and ask them what makes a good question, you'll get at least N+1 answers, I'm sure. So here's one. Whatever the answer to your question is, you know what the next question is going to be, right? You can draw out the tree at least a little bit, and say, if I run this experiment and I get this finding, this is what it will mean, and this is what I will do next. This isn't a perfect world, right? This is like the best kind of question you can find. And my favorites are the ones where it's interesting either way, right? It doesn't matter what the outcome is. I'm not personally invested in one way or the other. I get very excited when we get a research question, when we're able to find a question that has that shape. It doesn't matter what the answer is, because either way, it will be interesting and it will lead us to some new uncharted territory. Okay, so the soda thing is usually the question in a soda paper or in a soda experiment is, if we apply method X to task Y, and there may be a couple other variables here, will we soda on the evaluation score Z? That's who has written a paper like that? All those people are in other workshops. Nobody here has written a paper like this. Okay, fine. That's why you came to the negative results workshop. You didn't write the paper because you didn't soda. You got a negative result. You're sad. You're here. Welcome. You're among friends. So I would say this is is this a good question? And from a practitioner point of view, it often is. If Z is linked to the thing you care about, then yeah, it's a good thing. If Z is not linked to the thing you care about, and we heard glimmers of this, I think in Rachel's talk, when she said, well, leaderboards, they don't always mean the things that do these incremental things actually mean something for the end application? Not always. So that check mark should be like a check with an asterisk sometimes. I would say for a researcher, this is not an awesome question. By itself, it's not a very interesting question. If the question is really about the properties of X or the properties of Y or the properties of both, then you might be getting somewhere interesting. But I think by itself, this question, if this is all you've got, you're setting yourself up with potentially some disappointment and maybe worse. Okay, so here's a proposition, and I believe I've been saying this for more than 10 years to my mentees. I don't know if I've said it publicly. I understand this talk is being recorded, so this might be the moment that my career ends. You were here, you witnessed it, or maybe this is uncontroversial. I'm really not sure. So my proposition in big letters to soda is neither necessary nor sufficient for research progress. Okay, I believe that there's kind of a Venn diagram of SOTA results and research progress. And yes, there is a world. There are many papers here at this conference and the workshops where somebody reports a SOTA result and it contributes to a compelling argument. It changes the way researchers think. We're happy. Great. I have no problems with this kind of work. Okay. There are also situations one can find, and I'm not going to call out any particular papers because I think there's some subjectivity in making these judgments. But you can find papers where there was a SOTA on a task, and it was cheap calories. There was no scientific question that was advanced by that discovery. I made the numbers go up is the whole story, and that's it. And I would argue that those papers need more work. Maybe there is a scientific question hiding behind there, but when I get this kind of paper as a reviewer, I usually don't have a lot of excitement. On the other hand, it is possible, and I have written a lot of papers like this. So lots of existence proofs, and I've read many papers by great others. You can change researchers' minds not just by running experiments. Experiments often help. Okay, this is EMNLP after all. It was set up as a conference that was really meant to give a home to experimental work at a time when that was not popular or widely accepted in the ACL community. But I think we need to recognize that there are other ways to make advances that change people's minds and affect the conversation usefully and move us forward. Okay, so this is where I'm going to pivot a little bit and take a step back. And so I've done research on something called frames, actually a couple different things called frames. And now I'm going to turn it around and use the idea of framing to give you some ways to think about research that are maybe a little different. So what is a frame? We can have a very long conversation about this. The term gets used in a lot of different subfields. And the version I'm really referring to primarily here, it comes out of political science. And the idea is that framing something, we'll use it as a verb first, is choosing what aspects of it we're going to emphasize with our language when we talk about it. And by extension, which parts we're not going to talk about. And this is most easy to see when you look at the language of politicians and political actors. So a big one, in the United States, we have a lot of discussion about immigration in the United States, other parts of the world as well, I'm sure. And people with different perspectives on immigration will refer to the immigrants in very different ways. And they will choose words that emphasize different aspects of the status of a person. In one camp, you have people talking about undocumented workers. What do you take away from that? Well, there's some bureaucratic problems, but these are workers. They're contributing something. They're doing something positive in society. They're doing work. Another camp will use the term illegal aliens, kind of dehumanizing, emphasizes that they're not following the rules. They're aliens, right? That makes that makes me think of E.T. People remember, right? So these are different. You could say that these are evoking different frames for talking about immigrants. So I said I wasn't going to talk about results. I will do a couple call outs to research projects. So I've been working for about 10 years with a political scientist named Amber Boydston, and my former student Dallas Card is part of this collaboration as well. And we've been exploring for a long time now how tone and framing in the media of political issues and social issues co-vary with public opinion. And it's very difficult to make causal claims about this relationship. So I'm just going to be very weak in the claim and say that there's clearly covariance between the way we talk about these issues, the way the media talks about these issues, and how public opinion moves on these issues in the United States. I think another example, if you went to the third keynote at EMNLP, Stephen Bird gave this really compelling talk that I would argue was largely about frames for research around indigenous and niche languages, right? He called out these terms, poverty conscious NLP and saving languages. These evoke very specific ways of, they emphasize certain aspects of the research on these languages and the roles of the researchers. And his argument was that we needed a different frame. I don't think he used that term, but I think you could cast what he was saying as an argument about frames. And I think it's very important to think about the frames you're using. Here's my second big proposition. the frames that one uses reflect that person's values and may influence other people's values. So frames often, often there's a tendency to think, well, the framing of a paper, the framing of a research result, it's just the marketing, it's just the packaging, it's just the gloss that you put on it to help it get past review or make people excited about it or give you the thing to put in the tweet. I don't know. But I don't think they have to be just that. And I think they often aren't just that. I think often they really do influence the way lots of people think about the work. And because we're only human, and we all have these brains that are influenced by the language that we hear. Okay, so here we are. It's 2021. NLP has gotten big. There's too much to read. You agree? Yeah. Good. And I'm sorry, it's blurry. I don't know why. We need, I guess because my font is too small, I broke one of my own rules, but that picture was just too good. So PowerPoint now suggests styles for you, and it couldn't possibly suggest a style that would make the font too small, could it? I'm sorry for the people in the back. I would be complaining right now. So we need ways to measure progress. We need to know if we need to know if a paper is worth publishing. We need to know if this idea, if idea A is better than idea B. We have to, we need ways to think about this. And so maybe I think a lot of people have kind of been drawn to this frame, at least implicitly, that we should be thinking about research as this grand tournament. And depending on where you sit in society, the tournament might be at different scales. So it could be, maybe it's Google versus Meta, like the one big tech giant against another. You can probably find this framing has anybody read a New York Times article that pitches two big tech companies against each other in their visions for the future? Elon Musk versus somebody, I don't know. Or maybe it's an international thing, US versus China. I don't know. I'm not a fan of that frame personally, but it's you hear this. You hear people at high levels of society talk about things in this way. But also, going down into the research a little bit, a lot of the big results in AI that I think attracted people into the field at some point or another were success on games, right? Like if you, of my generation, you might remember Deep Blue, and IBM built this chess playing program, and like, wow, they won against someone famous. But then there was this result about 10 years ago for Jeopardy, and then there was Go, and probably a lot of. I'm not a games person. I think I mentioned I'm not an athlete. I also don't, much to the chagrin of my wife, I don't really love games in general. So like, it's like, oh, we go to a friend's house and they say, let's play this new game we've been enjoying. And I roll my eyes and pour myself another drink. I just don't like games. Anyway, I think, this comes all the way down to the level of our day-to-day work and comparing ideas. I think people like the idea of a game, who's winning the game, who's ahead. And so that leads us to our current favorite frame, the leaderboard. So here's the leaderboard, and leaderboards are a way of framing, quite literally in a grid, a collection of research findings. And I think this is golf. I don't know what those numbers mean. I think that's a time. I don't know. That's how I often feel when I see these tables in papers too. So what is this frame emphasizing? What is it bringing to the surface? What does it show? What does it tell you is important? At the top, who SOTA'd most recently? Who SOTA'd before them? Who's the best? Who's the winner? Who are the losers? The losers are down there, I think. Maybe it's the other way. I don't know. I don't understand golf. Maybe lowers, I don't know. You need arrows to tell us which direction is better, right? What is implied by this? It's implied, of course, when you see this in sports, that this was a fair competition, right? Everybody entered, they all paid the same fee to compete. They all went to the same elite schools where they teach golf. I don't know. Everything is fair, right? Golf is easy to pick on because, in the United States, not so long ago, you had to be a white man even to go in and play golf at the club. So I won't say more. I think you take my point. Let's talk about what's obscured. What does the leaderboard not show us that we might care about as researchers? Okay, lots of things outside the frame. First, what is the scientific question that this task or evaluation score is informing? What new knowledge will be created by understanding what happens on this leaderboard? I think that's there may be more than one, but let's talk about that, right? And you have to put this in your paper, I think to get through review, I think you have to talk about this. How does the evaluation data relate to realistic data, right? If the evaluation is supposed to be a proxy for some real world task of interest, if we're making claims that might be relevant to practitioners, then we should talk about the relationship between these two data sets. And maybe there are some limitations here. I think we're finding repeatedly, and we hear anecdotally repeatedly from practitioners, that our data sets are not always so connected to reality. How does the task itself relate to applications that serve human needs? Is the task actually something somebody wants, or is it a beginning? Is it a first step towards something somebody actually wants, right? If we're not building these things to serve human needs, what are we building them for? What about the number, the evaluation score? Is it a proven thing? Do we know that it's measuring exactly what we want it to measure? Maybe it did at some point in time. I've told a lot of people that I started my PhD in machine translation, and I know this is sounding like ancient history, but at the end of my first year, the BLEU score was published, and I pretty quickly left MT, at least for a long time, because I didn't believe the score. I think I was partly wrong. It clearly drove progress in the field for a long time. I don't think it's without value, but my feeling was that it didn't measure what we really needed to measure. And then I noticed that, in years following, work that tried to remedy that didn't get as much attention as it should. And I found this very frustrating. I still kind of find it frustrating, to be honest. It's one of the reasons I'm not, I will choose myself to I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that. Most of my research is driven by other people now. I will discourage people from working on problems where they don't believe in the evaluation score, or where they can't convince me that the evaluation score is meaningful. And then I think, another big thing that I look for, or often ask when I'm reading a paper, is when we get when somebody introduces a new solution to a problem or a new method, I'm always kind of curious about whether this method and its performance will help us understand the space of solutions or the space of problems that we're trying to solve. So I don't know, it's hard to explain because we only have one method now. But back at a time when we had lots of different methods, there was often kind of a sense that if you squinted your eyes and abstracted in the right way, you would see the connections between them, and you'd realize that they were kind of variants of similar ideas, and maybe they were making slightly different choices, but overall they were really sort of doing the same thing. And so this kind of research question, I think, isn't as popular now because we only have we have the transformer. What else do we need? It's all you need, right? It's all you need. That's what they. So anyway, so I guess my end rant, my question is, I think that I'm not against leaderboards. Okay, some of my best friends have created leaderboards, and after this is over, if you take me for a drink at the beach bar, you can ask me for my opinions about what it was like before we had anything like leaderboards. I think they serve a role. But I think we need to all be very clear that if all we think about are leaderboards, then and that's the frame that we all agree is the dominant frame that we are going to use in our research, then the researchers who are sitting at the top of the leaderboard and winning and feeling great, what is going to motivate them to ask these other questions? Okay, if you think these other questions might be important, then the leaderboard can't be the only frame. It can't be the only way we think about this. Okay, so here's another rant. I'm now vindicating my 12-year-old self. I think that there's a lot of parallels between the leaderboard frame and the leaderboard mentality, or making it primary in our thinking, and sports ball. So here are just a few observations, and we can discuss more if this is interesting to people. And I'm not, again, I have a strong anti-sports bias. I'm just not a sports person. But here are the things. So first off, in both cases, there are rules that have been set up in advance, and they are rigid and they are not negotiable, and they're very artificial. They always feel like why do you want to run that way I never understood. Actually, when we played American football when I was a kid, I never understood which way to run. It was very confusing. And like the rules just seemed arbitrary and strange, but you don't debate them, right? You don't say, well, hey guys, let's stop for a second. I think we should change it to 7 yards instead of, like, you can't do that, right? You can't go and raise the basketball hoop higher or something like that in the middle of the tournament. When you play the game, it doesn't matter how you win, right? As long as you follow the rules and you don't piss off the referee or whatever they call the person in the stripes, it doesn't matter how you get to the top. You just have to follow the rules, and as long as you follow the rules, you're fine. And think about, we can all remember maybe some leaderboard scandals where somebody didn't follow the rules and it was very serious, right? Bad things were said about people who did not follow the leaderboard rules. The rules are very strict. We don't like cheaters, right? But the rules were arbitrary. Okay. There's usually one-dimensional or very low-dimensional quantitative measures of success. I think baseball is the exception. There's lots of things that make a good baseball player. And there's lots of numbers. Baseball has lots of numbers on the board and they mean different things. But basically, it's all about these quantitative numbers, and that's really all we care about. And that's what ultimately affects what the player gets paid, which is probably the thing that matters the most at the end, or the profits of the corporation that own the sports ball team. Another thing about both leaderboard research and sports is that they're extremely emotional. Has anyone noticed this? Like, I don't think I've seen anybody doing leaderboard research paint their body blue or, wear, strange headdresses and things. But people have very strong, passionate feelings about these things. I've been drawn into it myself at times. And there's a notion of tribalism, like, you're cheering for one team to win. You really care. It's not rational. It has nothing to do, like, at the end of the day, we're all humans. I think in research, we're mostly more or less on the same team in terms of, wanting to create new knowledge and develop better understanding. I hope most of the time. But we create this, like, very emotional, low-dimensional world that encourages a mentality that is very competitive, right? And that's the point of sports. And then this is the other one that like when I realized this, it was really compelling to me. When you go to a sports game, there are people on the field, and then there's everybody else. And if you're outside, you don't go on the field. Bad things will happen to you if you try to go on the field, if you're not actually in the game, right? You are not invited. And I think the same thing happens with leaderboards. It took me a while to put this into words, but like, you read a paper and you look at the numbers on the leaderboard and you go, wow, look at all these people doing this great work. I couldn't do that. I don't have what it takes athletically. I can't get there. And, I think the same thing happens in research, although it's not athleticism, it's other things that you need to be able to get there in the first place. Okay. One more. Pre-existing wealth confers advantages. I think I've made this point subtly with a few barbs here and there. They talk about this in sports, how when the economic system of the sports league is such that some teams can be richer, everybody knows they're going to win more for a variety of reasons. And the same thing happens with leaderboard research. We all know it's an upset when a scrappy team that doesn't have a lot of advantages going into the competition pulls it off and gets first place at the shared task. It just doesn't happen very often. Oh, sorry, one more. Everyone should be focused on the same goal. So there's maybe a normative implication that that in sports, I mean, it's clear you're supposed to win, right? Everybody is trying to move the ball in the direction their team wants it to go. So I think I made this point with the picture before. Oh, right. And then, sorry, I forgot how many ideas I had on this. If you ever watch people playing sports on television, there are these other people who are also wealthy, who maybe used to play the sport, who are always talking, and they have so much to say, but like, doesn't the game speak for itself? I've never understood why people watch people on television talking about the sport. I don't understand it. Maybe somebody can explain it to me, but the same thing is happening with our research. Okay, you publish your paper or some big big famous tech group publishes their paper, and then there's all this buzz. There's all these people talking about it and reinterpreting it, and blog posts and tech press articles, like reporters report on, oh, there's this new model and it's even bigger. And like, I don't understand, like, just read the paper. Doesn't the paper say everything that needed to be said? I get that there's a need to communicate to the public and maybe translate the results a little bit, but most of it is not doing that. Most of it is just like, ooh, bigger, bigger. Yes, yes, he's almost there. He's running faster. That's what it looks like to me when sorry, okay. Okay, so this has been brewing in my head for a long time, but it only became clear. Thank you for the invitation and the permission to go off of giving a research talk or a talk about actual results, because thinking about this talk really clarified some things for me. This actually happened at my thesis defense, which was in 2006. So I'm quoting my own thesis, the revised final version of my thesis here. It is conceded, you got to love my use of the passive voice here, that the task, I won't say what task it was, on which performance improvements are demonstrated is an Olympic sport in that it only approximates real world problems faced by the NLP practitioner. Why did I stick this in my dissertation? Why did I add this caveat? It was because of Fred Jelinek. So Fred was a very well-known researcher in speech recognition and natural language processing. Unfortunately, he passed away some years ago. He wasn't actually on my committee. He came to my defense. He was the director of the center where I did my PhD. You used to work there too. There are probably some other CLSP folks here or out there in the metaverse. Anyway, Fred made this comment at my thesis defense that was something along the lines of, you've shown very nice results on this Olympic sport, but what does it really mean for the real world? And it was a little bit deflating, but it was true. I couldn't argue with it, right? The task I was working on, and the tasks I think many of us were working on back then, and the tasks many of us are working on right now are really distant from meeting actual human needs or building the applications we dream of. And that's okay. It's research. It's fine. Let's be honest about it, right? Let's be clear about it. Okay, so here's the main proposition of the talk. The notion that a result can be negative presupposes a sports-like frame. So if we reject sports-like frames, we should not have this workshop again. I'm sorry. But thank you so much for the invitation. So I'm not 100% against sports-like frames. I will not automatically reject your paper for having a leaderboard. I'm not going to impose some rule at EMNLP 2022 where I'm the general chair that we will have no leaderboards. I know some people would like me to. There will be an industry track, but I think we should be very clear. And actually, I think Zach's talk brought some clarity to this notion of a negative result and pointed out that there were different kinds. So I think I had a narrow set of things in mind when I made this proposition. So there's maybe a little bit of negotiation to be done. But I think in general, when people say this result is a negative result, they mean we didn't SOTA. And that sort of assumes that the thing that's most of value is the leaderboard, and that's what we should all be driving toward. And I would like to not necessarily obliterate that point of view, but let's make it explicit. And let's allow for other points of view. Some additional thoughts. Okay, a few positive things. Leaderboards do have their uses. Shared tasks at workshops have been around for a long time, and they've actually led to a lot of cross-pollination among ideas. You get a group of people all working on the same thing for a little while, bring them all to a location like Punta Cana, and get them to talk about what they did, look at what worked, what didn't work. It's not just about who wins at these things. It's about all the different ideas that are brought to the table, the different things people tried. Did two people try almost the same thing? Were the results consistent? Is there any follow-up work to be done? Often there is. And we do need to be able to fairly compare systems and models and methods. We do need experimental work that does controlled experiments. That does controlled comparisons between ideas. But I don't think the leaderboards always give us that. And I don't think the leaderboards are necessary for that. And then I want to be very clear. I believe, and I think people who work with me will tell you, I very strongly believe that we need a lot of different kinds of skills to make progress in NLP. And implementation, experimentation skills, execution skills, these are wonderful things. If you have these things, use them. Find teams where they are valued. This is great, okay? But they aren't the only things that are wonderful. And they're even more powerful when they're coupled with other people who have complementary skills. who can think about the definition of the problem, who can think about the social impacts, who can think about the formulation of the way you're going to evaluate the model. Okay, so I have a little bit more. A few other frames I could have talked about that worry me that I'll just toss out and we ask me later. I get a weird feeling when people anthropomorphize functions, which is what our models are. I don't like it. And I can't quite tell you why. I can't go on quite the same lengthy rant as I did about sports, but it worries me. And if it worries you too, let's talk more about it. I really hate, I don't know why exactly, again, I hate it, but when people talk about language as like this puzzle, it's a puzzle and we want to put the pieces together. And one day somebody's going to put all the pieces together and we'll have solved language. Have you ever heard somebody say they're going to solve language? Like, what does that mean? And then there's another thing, and I think there is a lot of work that's really great that tries to show connections between different problems. But I think there's a sort of superficial version of this, which is that we can reduce a task of type A into the format of task B, and therefore by extension, we should use the same solutions for both A and B, and they should be the same. The solution should always be the same. Just because we can make the two things look like each other, we should use the same solution to solve them. That just seems fallacious to me. Maybe you can convince me otherwise. There's another term that I avoid, this idea that research can be pure. Like research can be, sometimes it comes across as like research is completely disinvested from the answers, which I may have given you the hint that I think it can be. I think the answers are important. The societal implications are important. Research can't be apolitical. Research can't be pure. It can't be unconnected to the world. Maybe in theoretical, purely theoretical fields, but we don't have that. That is not us. Let's go positive. Some frames that I have liked, that I have used or encouraged. I love the idea of trade-off curves, that there are many competing concerns that matter for a model, and what you want to do in this research project is explore that curve, make it push the boundaries of that curve, make it better, improve the trade-off. I love the frame of making your models more customizable, more flexible. This was actually in the United States. One of the important things you try to do as an assistant professor is you get this thing called the career grant. And the title of my career grant was something like flexible NLP. The idea that you want to give the model more ways it can be used so that it's not just a monolithic black box. We've heard that before. Abstracting different ideas that seem to be quite distinct, or that seem to be competing ideas, and showing how they're actually pushing forward. They're instances of the same more abstract idea. I love this kind of work. I think some of the things that people working with me have done in this area are extremely exciting. Often when you come up with this abstraction that unifies several things that are on the table already, you generate some new ones that have some new exciting properties. I don't know why, I'm actually mostly vegetarian, but I love the idea of sort of omnivorous NLP, that you have lots of resources at your disposal. You're not tying your hands behind your back needlessly. You're using what's available to you. And there are often resources that are quite useful in domains that maybe we don't talk about as much at NLP, but incredibly empowering. One example of this is in medical and clinical related NLP, they often have knowledge bases that have structured information that's relevant to the domain encoded in a very formal object. And being able to make use of that in NLP is quite useful for them. We don't see much work talking about that in NLP because we like to be pure. We just want the text data. The more text data we can get, that's all we want to use, right? We'd rather tie our hands behind our back and be restricted, and it's somehow seen as a virtue to do more with less. For some reason, okay, I'll finish up quickly. I didn't think I was going to get anywhere close to the end. All right, apparently I have a lot to say. There are a lot of things that have brought human civilization forward. Plumbing, cartography, masonry, inoculation. Who's vaccinated? We're all, hopefully. Viticulture, fermentation, distillation, things that bring us tasty things to eat and drink. I love using these things as inspiration, at least at a small scale, for models. This is something I only sort of retroactively noticed in my own work. Things that are maybe a little bit more humble and close to the physical world, but have brought us forward. I feel like these are more inspiring, at least for me. That have nothing to do with sports. Okay, I'm not going to talk about recent examples. I had call outs to Matt and Will and Sarah and Anna and Jesse. Thanks for coming to my talk. I didn't know you were coming, but like pretty much everybody I called out. That's I apparently I have what's the word? Foresight. Thank you. Anyway, so final bit. Here are the things that I think will happen for you if you think about the frames that you use to design your research agenda and you find good ones. I can't make these promises, but here's the advertisement. I think people will be more inclined to hire and fund you if you have a great frame. I think that you are more likely to inspire other people to read your papers and build on your work if you entice them with a frame that they can believe in. I think that you will ask questions that are more likely to give informative answers more of the time. Always is probably too strong, and not just positive or negative answers. And your own motivation and your own mental health will potentially be decoupled from your experiment's outcomes. Who would like that? Who would like to be able to just like shut down at 5 p.m. while the job is running, go home, and know that whatever happens with that experiment, something new will be interesting and you'll have interesting work to do tomorrow? Does that sound good? Okay, let's keep working on the frame and not just focus on the leaderboard. I also think that this will lead, this is good for the field, not just us individually and for our own health. I think it will also help us recognize that in fact, and this, I don't think this is like something that needs to come about. I think this is already true. I think there are many kinds of work that actually are valued by individuals. I think it's just a little harder to see for a variety of reasons. But we need to be more vocal about recognizing the different ways to win at research, the different ways to make a contribution to change the way researchers think. And this will mean that our field becomes more inclusive, and it will mean that our field becomes more diverse, the more we recognize different kinds of contributions. So if you take away nothing else, please keep research and practice distinct in your mind. Neither is right or neither is wrong. They're just different things. And when you're wearing one hat, you might make different choices than if you're wearing the other. Recognize the sports frame when you see it. Just think that's the sports frame. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just one thing. When you are writing and when you are discussing research with others, choose your frames consciously. Choose frames you believe in. Choose frames that you think will lead to progress, and do it with intention. Don't just accept the frames you hear from other people. And remember that the one you've chosen or the one you're using today isn't the only one, and there are others. And, you know, it's like you can have a conversation with somebody at the conference who's in a totally different mindset. They're thinking about it's okay. It's okay. It's great. One day you might be working on that problem too, and you'll be glad you had that conversation. Okay, I'll stop there. Really happy to take questions. Thanks so much. This is like, there are what, 30 people here. And for those of you in the metaverse, it's been like, really get back to physical conferences when you can. It's been I haven't had so much fun at a conference in a very long time. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, so I will call on folks here in the audience, and I'll try to repeat your question because I don't think there's a mic for you. Ari. My paraphrase of the question is the field is growing, and that growth leads us to essentially feel the need to appeal to a very broad audience, which is maybe you didn't use this phrase, but maybe a least common denominator kind of effect, like everything kind of collapses down to us as a sort of first order thing. I think everybody, here's my potentially controversial position on this, is everybody feels this because everybody thinks it's true, but it's not actually true. Get off Twitter. Stop using popularity and citation counts to think about what's important. Develop your own opinions, find your people, find your tribe, find the people you like talking to at the conference. I've had so many conversations at this conference where I gave a little pitch for this talk and people were like, oh yeah, I agree. Okay. I think the vast majority of people don't want to do boring leaderboard research and are just worried that it's the only thing they can do. And I think we have lots of existence proofs of great work that doesn't do it. And we just need to talk about it more and not worry so much what everybody thinks, and not to imagine that there's this monolithic crowd out there that's all thinking the same way. There isn't. It's a myth. Yes, the person in front of Max, whose name I don't know. Yeah, you. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Margot.
Oh, Margot, we met yesterday. Sorry. Yeah, now. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have two questions, comments I don't quite know.
One at a time, please.
The first one ties back to the first keynote for today. So my feeling is that very often reviewers just look at the numbers.
Yep.
And how do you change the mindset of people who just take this simplified view of, you didn't beat, you didn't soda, so why should we publish a paper? And when you think, okay, that was not the point that I was trying to make.
Yep. This is a frustration. Who's had it? Who's had it 10 times? Who's had it 100 times? Yes. We all hate this. This happens a lot. I actually got reviews just today that it was exactly like that. Not only that, but they quoted numbers wrong. It was infuriating. It was so frustrating. So I'll repeat what some others have said, which is that, yes, this is a real thing. I don't think it is as universally bad as we often feel it is. I have found personally that continuing to try, usually eventually we get there. Then, make your rebuttal, make the point to the area chair. When you're training reviewers, for those of you who train reviewers, teach them well, but you might get the rejection. You try again. I was telling somebody earlier today, in 20 years, I have the number of papers I have that I thought deserved to be published, but ran into this wall and couldn't ever get published at a place I was happy with ever. I can count on one hand in 20 years. So I don't want to say it's not bad. And I have some advantages that not everybody has. I'm a native speaker, but I think, you've got to keep trying. You might have to change your strategy. You might have to think about the venue. You might have to archive it and let it have its impact that way first. I don't love that. I don't want to break blind review. There's a lot of things at stake here, but I think I would encourage people who are in this, try again, at least a few times, keep at it. We on the organizer side, and those of us who have leadership roles and have to organize conferences and such, need to think about mechanisms that, ARR is supposed to help. We'll see. We've got some work to do. Let's all keep at it. This is a community problem. We've all got to keep at it. What was your second question?
Second question relates to framing. So I think that workshops like this are important, but I was never happy with the name of the workshop. Sorry, guys. Because I always think it's not negative results. It's still results and it's still valuable.
Yeah.
So that's why I was wondering how we can rename this workshop.
Let's broaden the vocabulary of results or something like that. I don't know, widening NLP results. No, we shouldn't steal. We'll work on it over dinner. Or maybe I don't get to go. I've been disinvited from dinner now. All right, I'm gonna see if there's anything in the chat. No. Is anyone raising their hand? I can't see. Anything else from the folks here? It's been a long day. Yeah, in the back.
So I think one way of approaching this set of questions that we ask is also ignoring this generic word. But how do we get the people in the other communities to also pay attention to what's going on?
Okay, so the question is, part of broadening the questions is and the frames is engaging in interdisciplinary work. Great point. How do we get people in other fields to pay attention to us? I feel like everybody is paying attention to us, whether we want it or not. And I don't think you have to work very hard to find points of connection in many, many other disciplines. Maybe the ones you have in mind are different from the ones I have experienced and run into. But generally, when you start talking about what we want NLP to do, there are a lot of people who immediately see potential new applications and new things you could do and connections to their field. The hard part, in my view, is, well, there are several. One is finding the collaborators who have enough of a shared vision that you can actually work together well. The second is learning to talk to each other, because people in different disciplines speak different languages. And, you know, I say the word frame and it means something very different to somebody else. And there's so many things like that. And it's not like the metaphors we use in NLP research are particularly translatable into other worlds, particularly if they're outside, you know, really far away from computer science. So I think there are a lot of challenges. It takes a lot of time. The biggest one, I think, is the differences in publication culture. So, you know, in some fields, it's books. You write books or you write journal articles, and you spend years, you know, on a project. You don't churn something out after 3 or 6 months. That's just not done. You can't. And so things move at a different pace, and the scale is very different. And it is quite challenging. And some of my PhD students who've done interdisciplinary work with outside collaborators can tell you it's quite challenging to figure out how to navigate meeting everybody's career needs, right? Because in CS, you want to be publishing regularly, you know, you need to be visible. And if you're going to put a lot of energy into this big interdisciplinary project, you need to find ways to carve off pieces that are interesting to the research community. My position on this, and I could say a lot more, is that as a junior person, you kind of have to be credible in your own discipline before you can delve into interdisciplinary work. You have to have a discipline to be interdisciplinary. You can't only be interdisciplinary. So I think this is something you have to play the long game on, and develop the vision and slowly start learning the related field well enough that you can find the collaborators when you're in a position to invest for the long term. It's never going to be a quick win. Matt, hi.
Hey, nice talk. I think you could probably say there's some correlation between like the career of a grad student and the kinds of questions that are a typical career in NLP incentivized, with like internships in industry, the number of papers you need to graduate, and all of this. So I think you would probably also say that common perceptions of like what you need to succeed aren't like the only way to go. I wonder what you could say about like incentives.
Yeah. I think what you're basically saying is that as people move through their career, and probably most of the folks watching are earlier in their careers than I am, and the incentives change. And so the kinds of questions that you're encouraged by those incentive structures to answer are going to shift over time. I think that's true, and I think everybody should be aware of that. They also shift just by virtue of the changing nature of the field. We've heard senior people say, you know, now they see PhD applications with more papers than people used to have when they were going up for tenure. Well, papers are different things now than they used to be, right? Everything is different. But yeah, so your question is basically like, given those kinds of expectations about how you make it to the next phase, how can you take away this result? Maybe
even more particularly, it seems like the incentives of the career these days are pushing people more towards soda-like questions.
I don't agree. I do think that there are certain types of jobs that value soda work very highly, but I don't think that's all of them. And you know, I've been on hiring committees at universities that are well ranked, and what I tell everybody is quality matters more than quantity. And if you can't explain your research well and there's no vision underneath of it, I think you're going to have a harder time.
There's one question from the metaverse. Sina, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's my take that actually, so you discouraged in part of your talk, discouraged doing research that does not have a good enough evaluation metric, right? And then we also we all agree that maybe discouraging research that chooses this sports framing is also a very good idea. But then how can we value work that focuses on work that there is no evaluation metric for it? How can we value such research?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. So I think the point I was trying to make there was that it is valuable research to evaluate the evaluation metrics and to propose better ways to do evaluation. So if we can improve the evaluation metrics, then you've made a contribution, right? In other words, the leaderboard has columns, and maybe the columns can be improved, not just the rows.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a couple more in person over here. Sorry, can you say it again a little louder? So the question was, apologies for the ones I forgot to repeat. I'm juggling a lot of things. So the questioner likes my example of fermentation. How have I used it in my research? So one of the things that I do regularly with my grad students is I take them out for drinks, and many of them drink beer. No, the point I was trying to make about fermentation is that it's inspirational more as like, this was an important thing that influenced our human life in a positive way. And actually, my wife is a microbiology professor who has taught classes on fermentation, and like students will take samples of cheese and analyze the things living in the cheese. She wanted to do it with beer, but it's hard to do that at a public university. Anyway, I think fermentation things like fermentation and plumbing are. I don't know why I find them inspirational as ways of thinking about what our work is doing, but people who've worked with me have found that I often come up with these, things like spigot and retrofitting are like, I don't know if I've ever done one that had to do with fermentation. Other people did distillation though. Yeah, there was one over here somewhere. Yeah.
Thanks, Julian. My question is, you recently mentioned that trial work try to find better metrics or metrics that reflect the things you care about, and I agree. But it seems to be, in my experience, that these metrics improvements don't seem to stick, and there's another
Yeah.
bias.
Yeah.
Keep,
Using the same old ones.
still around, for example,
Yeah.
why do you think that is, and what are we doing?
Okay, the question is, agree with the point that we should improve the metrics, but when new metrics get proposed, they don't seem to stick. Why is that, and what can we do? Why it is, I'm not sure. I mean, I think everybody can't read everything, so probably part of the issue might be that the people who are focused on advancing the state of the art on the task didn't read that new paper about the evaluation metric, or they're just waiting for everybody else, or they're waiting for the official evaluation to adopt it and include it, because it's kind of somebody else's decision. Like one person can't affect that change. There needs to be some kind of community effort, and so maybe it's a tragedy of commons kind of situation. What can we do? I don't want to give away too much, but we have work in progress that I think is hopefully going to make it a little easier to see the relationship between advances on the rows and the columns. So hopefully, keep watching my group's publication page. Hopefully we'll have something exciting. In the back, yeah. So cut me off when we're going way over time.
Hi, my name is Max. Also, on metrics, we have a similar problem in social life, evaluating social life. We also have these metrics, and it's very hard to evaluate, see what they actually measure, especially if we're looking at what it measures. And part of the issue is also that you're trying, like getting back into the leaderboard thing, you're actually trying to be comparable with other research, right? So when you publish this new model that's better than something else, what you do is use machine translation, use reverse work. You actually kind of compare yourself to other research and say how much you advanced on this particular metric. And I think that's also part of the issue why new metrics are usually not adopted. I think part of the solution could be just encourage encourage people to evaluate the work on all the metrics that are good. And they first clear appendix or whatever.
Yep.
And this also ensures that if you find in the future a particular metric is particularly bad, or like, I don't know, just doesn't cover one particular aspect, that you can still compare all the research with the other metrics. I think this also has some
Okay. The summary is that one reason that new metrics don't come about is that people want to be able to compare to past work. And so the suggestion is let's all report all the metrics in the appendix of our paper. Or, I could add to that, release the output of the system so that others can run the metrics or the new metrics that come about. Yeah. I think there's a lot of better practices we could have around reproducibility and comparability. And they wouldn't be hard. And they're not hugely technically challenging to implement. They just require some sort of concerted effort and some advocacy and some old people with gray hair pounding the table a little bit. So, I like it. Yeah.
All right. So let's thank Noah again.
Thank you.